If you could only eat one last meal before you died, what would it be? Death row inmate Billy Bailey chose a well-done steak, a baked potato with sour cream and butter, buttered rolls, peas, and vanilla ice cream. This is Death Row Diner. So we've done a steak before, but we haven't done buttered rolls from scratch before, so we're going to start with that. So you could do all this by hand, but if you got a stand mixer, you might as well use it, because, smoke 'em if you got 'em, as the kids say. I'm going to be using a recipe from allrecipes.com called Grandma Rita's Soft Butter Rolls, because nobody knows soft butter rolls like everyone's favorite grandma that they just heard of. So this is supposed to be done in a microwave, but I don't have one, so we're going to pour 3/4 of a cup of milk into a pot on the stove and heat it until it's just about boiling, but not boiling over. If you're no microwave having fool like me and you're doing it on the stove, you're going to want to stir it every now and then because milk likes to burn at the bottom of a pot. Add in 1/4 of a cup of butter, 1/4 of a cup of sugar, which seems like a lot of sugar for something that isn't a dessert. But Grandma Rita hasn't failed me before, so let's go for it. A teaspoon of salt. I use salted butter, so I use slightly less than a teaspoon. Give it a stir until it's all incorporated, and then turn off the heat. And allow it to cool down to about 110 degrees. In the bowl of your stand mixer, add half a cup of warm water, 4.5 TSPs of active dry yeast, and 1 TSP of white sugar. Stir it up and come back 5 minutes later. If it's puffed up like this, you're good to go. If not, your yeast is dead, friend. But since we're good to go, we'll mix in our milk and butter mixture, as well as a cup of bread flour and 1 beaten egg. Affix your dough hook and let her rip. As it starts to come together, slowly add in 2.5 more cups of bread flour. Does it have to be bread flour? Nah, not really. Bread flour has more protein in it, which develops the gluten more, which gives you more of a chewier, stretchier, breadier texture, so it's an added bonus, but all-purpose flour will work just fine too. Let it knead for a few minutes and then peel it off the dough hook. There we go. We're just gonna cover it with a towel and leave it in a warm place for an hour or so. In a little bit, we're gonna start the oven for the baked potato, set it to 400 degrees. We're gonna use a russet potato here. They're pretty good for baking, so we're just gonna poke it with a few holes so she doesn't blow up. A potato with just sour cream and butter, so we're not gonna get too fancy with it. We're going with a sirloin steak, because that's what I was able to find at the store. But for some reason, this guy wanted a well-done steak, so we're going to have to work with that. I figured the best way to do that is with as much added flavor as possible, so give it a generous sprinkling of kosher salt. We're also going to use our favorite steak seasoning here. It contains various spices, according to the ingredients. Those include spices. Mustard, salt, dehydrated garlic, palm oil, mustard again, and we're going to be super generous with it. Since it's well done, it's not going to be super great, so we got to do as much as we can to salvage this thing. And we're going to let this sit at room temperature for a good 45 minutes or so. Back to Grandma Rita's buttery buns. Now that this thing's risen nice and good, we're going to dump it out onto a cutting board. A cutting board I probably should have floured first. Then we're going to cut this into 3 even pieces. Ooh, he's not looking too happy there. And each of those 3, roll them out and cut them into 6. And try to roll them into little ball shapes. Then take them and spread them out on a parchment-lined baking sheet. Repeat with the remaining balls, and then we're going to cover it with a towel again and let it rest for another half hour at least. And after half an hour to 45 minutes, take off the towel and we'll see that they have risen slightly. They probably should have risen more than this. I don't know if I did something wrong. Oh well, it's bread. How bad can it be? Now that that steak's absorbed a lot of that flavor, we're going to start heating up our cast iron pan. We'll start a pot of water for the peas while we're at it. Since the steak and peas cook relatively quickly and a hot potato stays hot for virtually forever, we're going to take the potato out of the oven and replace it with the dinner rolls. And make sure the heat's lowered down to 350. Grandma Rita would be pissed if we burned her buns. Once your pan's hot and smoking, we're going to add some fat. I'm going to use clarified butter here. There's something morbid about cooking an animal in the fat that's created from the thing that the animal makes. But there's something morbid about all of this, isn't there? So anyway, take that chunk of animal corpse and throw it on the pan. Give it a flip after a few minutes. Like I said in the last steak video, you can flip it as many times as you want. It just helps it cook more all the way through, since the top that's now hot is going to radiate down and cook the middle. Make sure to press the sides against the pan too. We don't want any pink in here. Check the temperature periodically. Right now it's at about 125 in the middle, so if we wanted the steak to be good, we'd take it off now for a nice medium rare. But that's not what we're doing today. Thanks a lot, Billy. Alright, we're at about 155 now, and not quite the 160 needed for well done, but it's going to keep cooking as it rests, so I'm going to call it. And after about 15 minutes in the oven, our dinner rolls are ready. Let's just ignore the edge of the parchment paper that I totally didn't light on fire, and we're going to brush these buns with a bit of melted butter. If we do this a little bit ahead of time before we eat them, the butter will soak in and give them a nice golden flavor. Since the peas only take a few minutes to cook, we're going to cook them now while the steak is resting. We're just going to use frozen peas, because frozen peas are great, and no reason not to use them. After 3 or 4 minutes, strain them out over the sink, and then I forgot to record it, but add in a bit of butter and a pinch of salt. Always a pinch of salt. Also add the butter and sour cream to the potato, then it's time to plate up. And there we have it. A pretty old-timey feeling last meal. It's alright, but it's a little boring. One of the worst ways to cook a steak, one of the most boring ways to cook a potato, one of the most boring side vegetables, even the ice cream flavor, vanilla. There's a reason vanilla is used as a term to describe things that are pretty basic. Although, those buttery buns, Grandma Rita knows what she's doing. They are a little sweet. I'd cut down on the sugar, but it's definitely the best part of this. I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 10.